Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina. I'm the host here. My guest today is knitwear designer Seth Richardson. And I've been, scrolling through your Instagram, and knitting is just like one of the gazillion things that you do, actually. There is like some felting, needle felting, there is some weaving and sewing and like all kinds of fiber arts on your Instagram, and I don't even know where to start. So I guess like let's start from the beginning. Tell me when it all started, like when your interest in fiber art started.
Yeah, it started when I was a boy. It's, something I've kind of always been interested in. The story is that, when I was probably around 7 or 8 years old, my mom had a friend who used to come by and she would it was a friend of hers from college, and she'd come by and she'd visit and, have coffee with my mom in the living room, and she was always working on something. And I just remember always being fascinated by it. So I'd watch her as she crocheted or she did some kind of needlepoint. And she actually taught me how to crochet. She taught me different types of needlepoint, cross stitch and things like that. And so, as a young boy, I was very interested in it, had a lot of fun doing it. But as I got a little bit older, like kind of when I got to about fifth grade, I started to kind of sense that it wasn't the kind of thing that boys are really supposed to be doing. And I got kind of embarrassed by it. And, I wasn't bullied for it. Nobody made fun of me, but like I sensed that it was about to start happening. So before anybody could, I kind of just tossed all of those hobbies aside, which is, I think, maybe a little bit sad because it's like, there's a whole decade of crafting that I kind of missed. The one thing that I found after that I was able to continue to do that was like socially acceptable was make those like friendship bracelets that you make at camp. Like that was like a thing that I kind of did for the next 10 years. Um, and kind of always wanted to get back into the fiber arts, always wanted to learn how to knit. And it wasn't until after college that one of my dearest friends from high school, I was living in the East Village of New York City, and one of my dearest friends from high school moved to New York City to start grad school. And she and I lived together, and we would watch TV, and she would always be knitting. I guess her mom and her grandmother used to knit, and one day I was just like, you have to teach me. And next thing I know, I'm, learning how to knit. And then, you know what it's like. It's like once you learn one technique or one skill, you're like, oh, I want to try that next thing. I want to try that next thing. And so that was more than 20 years ago at this point, and it's kind of really evolved from there. And I love all sorts of other aspects of the fiber arts. I really enjoy sewing. I am not a great sewer. I want to get better at it. Weaving is a lot of fun. Needle felting is a lot of fun. So I love to play around with different areas of the fiber arts, but knitting is really kind of where things landed for me. This is like my home. This is what feels the most comfortable for me. And little did I know, 20 years after starting learning how to knit, that it would end up becoming a career path for me.
Right. Well, let's talk about like the beginning when you learn how to knit. So she showed you like the basic stitches. You started like probably your first scarf. Was it scarf?
It was a scarf. And the first thing I knit was so I remember I actually still have the first set of needles that I got. They're like size 8. They're really long bamboo clover needles. And I got them at a shop in New York. And I also got like this olive green and black yarn. And I made this. The only thing I knew how to do was stockinette. So, and I didn't really understand how stockinette worked or anything like that. So I was like, I'm going to make, I guess it was my first design because I figured out like, oh, all I have to do is cast on so many stitches and then I could just change colors and make a striped scarf. So I made this striped scarf. And, it worked out great for a couple of inches. And then once I got this far in, it started to curl in on the sides. And then I was so deep into this project that I had to finish it. So I finished it, even though it was just basically a tube at that point. But I finished this black and green striped scarf, and then I put a bunch of fringe on the end. It was a really tightly knit scarf too. So I have no idea what happened to it, but but that was the first project that I ever finished.
Well, it's interesting that like you became a designer from your very first project, basically. But like, at what point of your knitting life did you decide to start publishing designs?
Well, that is actually is a COVID story. So I mean, this and a lot of it has to do with the fact that I now live in Portland, Oregon. So I moved from New York City about 6.5 years ago, and my husband and I we decided that we basically just quit our jobs and moved to Portland. And Portland is a great place for people who are interested in any kind of DIY craft, anything, you can find a home for it here. And the fiber arts community here is robust, welcoming, and moving here, I immediately found a group of people in the fiber arts that that I never really had in New York City. Like I didn't really have a community, and I found it here. So I was working in a nonprofit at a large nonprofit here in Portland, and my background up until that point was in volunteer program management. So I would oversee different volunteer programs, and COVID happened, and happened with a lot of places, departments had to shut down, and so since there was no space for my department to actively exist when people couldn't get together, my department was shut down. And so there I was, in 2020 looking for the next project. And a few things kind of happened at the same time. And part of that is because of the relationships that I developed here in Portland, both both through the internet, both like through Instagram, which is one major way that I met a lot of people, but also just through different, the fiber community things that I did here up until COVID. So like, I guess there are like three things that kind of happened at once. There was, we have quite a few great yarn producers here in Portland, not just like big commercial yarn producers, but also a lot of, independent dyers as well. But of course, Brooklyn Tweed is here. So became friendly with the folks over at Brooklyn Tweed, and Jared and Luigi were very supportive in this like weird transition. And I got a message from Luigi saying, we're coming out with this new yarn, and now that everything is shut down, we have all of these mill ends. These are basically just like, not full skein, or they're full skeins worth, but they're all of these like segments of yarn. It's not really a thing that they can sell. And they're like, there's nothing that we can do with this right now. We would normally sell this in like a warehouse sale, but we can't have that in person this year. So here, why don't I just give you a bunch of yarn? There's a blanket's worth of yarn in here. Why don't you go ahead and make something with it? And so that was kind of the first invitation of just like, do something creative with this time. You're blessed with this moment to just breathe. Why don't you just go do it? And so that was kind of the first project, and that was immediately followed up by someone who I think has become a bit of a mentor to me, Sandy Barnes, who at the time was working at Shibui Knits, and they're no longer a business. They're no longer in business, but she was kind of approached me over Instagram. We had this Instagram relationship, and she said, hey, why don't you take some of this time and do some design work? And I said, well, I don't know. It just feels like the kind of thing that I just would do on my own, but sure, why not? Like, what else do I have to lose? Let's give it a try. So she sent me some yarn for this collaboration that they had coming up with was Shibui Knits and Madeline Tosh doing this collaboration together. They were releasing a bunch of new colors together. And next thing I know, my first pattern is coming out of this collaboration. And I'm starting to get this sense of like, oh, this is a lot of fun. I enjoy this. This is a great way for me to be creative. And then like the third project came along. Another friend, Joe Muller, who has a gallery here in town called Day in the Life Gallery, was saying, hey, why don't you maybe design a blanket for us? And so next thing I know, I'm designing another blanket. So I have these three projects going on that are kind of just launching me into this new career path. I mean, it was just like the universe was telling me this is what you need to do right now. And so I just went with it. And it's been a ton of fun. Completely unexpected, but it feels really right. So
When you talk about design, right, I always have this hesitation because, like, not too many things in knitting are new. Like, a lot of things are, how many raglan sweaters can you make and how many cables are there and all these things. What was your journey like? Like, how did you find what felt original to you?
yeah, oh, this is okay. This is a so I will say, I'll start by describing like what I would say my style kind of has evolved into. It tends to be very architectural. I'm drawn to uh, the relationships of straight lines. You'll see a lot of straight lines in my work, a lot of geometry. And I really love how looking at a very large piece of fabric that repeats over and over again. There's something very comforting and beautiful about that. So that's kind of what it's evolved into. And you're right. There's only so much that you can do to really like revamp the whole craft, but there's always new trends that are happening. There's always new yarns coming out. So there's always room to play around with a new design. Um, I will say though that probably where I started thinking about where I kind of land in the design world, like predated even doing design work. And I think some of it was, I think it even like the story that I told you about being a boy and just sort of feeling like, oh, understanding this is not a thing that boys are supposed to do, so I'm going to give this up before anyone can make fun of me. And I think, I feel like I'm about to get into like a conversation that like I don't know that I'm totally prepared to talk about, but to talk about what gender means in this space is kind of where I think my approach ended up being. Um, as somebody who is, as a cisgender man, a lot of people don't see me as someone who is a traditionally part of this craft. I mean, I can even, think back to a story not that long ago where I was at a fiber festival volunteering for my local knitting guild, and I was just knitting something, and someone came up to me and was like, "Oh my goodness, I just love to see a man who's knitting," and it was, and my response to that was, yes, we have this wonderful craft that we share, but I think I think it surprises me that people are surprised to see someone who looks like me who was working on this craft. And I, as much as my designs are intended to be gender neutral, I mean, this is a part of my story and part of my influence. So I think a lot of that does come from like my perspective and my upbringing and my experience as a man who's in the crafting space. Um, and also someone who is inspired by traditional menswear. So I think that's kind of how my approach to my design works, and I think that's kind of why I'm a little bit more intrigued by bold straight lines and instead of lacy frilly things, which I love to knit, but it's just not how my brain works when it comes to design work.
Right. Well, how do those ideas pop to your head? Like, you walk on the street and you see some building and you think of shapes, or do you open the Stitch dictionary and you see some interesting cable lines? Like, how do you approach designs?
Yeah, I mean, everything's a little different, of course. Very rarely do I open up the Stitch dictionary. Sometimes I will if it's like there's an effect that I'm trying to get and I just can't intuitively figure it out. It's like, oh, I can see something similar to it that will help me get there. But yeah, it is a lot of like just seeing the motif. Like I was at a restaurant the other day and they had this wallpaper on the wall that was just like really cool lines. And of course, I took a snapshot of that because I was like, it's not as it isn't a perfect fit for a design, but like there's something in there that could be fun to draw some inspiration from. But yeah, I mean, you see these things everywhere. So that is often how I start thinking about an idea. In fact, I'm working on a design right now that is, I guess wallpaper is my thing right now. It's sort of inspired by 1970s geometric wallpaper, and that's just a lot of fun to play with. I mean, it's not an exact copy of the source, the original piece that I was looking at, but it definitely is like, oh, well, how do I recreate this fun motif or a motif similar to this that evokes the same kind of feel, but how do I do it if I'm drawing lines in one color of fabric, in drawing lines and texture? So yeah, a lot of it is just sort of what I see around my world, and that's and then just trying to find a way to translate that into fabric.
Is it difficult to be a knitwear designer like as a career? Because you basically like you can just travel the world and wait for inspiration, or you can be like super disciplined about it and you do the 9 to 5 every day. Like, how do you do it?
Yeah, well, this is my full-time work. So, I mean, as a small business person, this is what I have to do. I have to make this business work. So, I know I am not traveling the world looking for inspiration. There's plenty of inspiration right here in my backyard. But it is definitely, I'm learning. Um, I didn't expect for this to be a career. It wasn't like I came out of college and I said, this is what I want to do with my life. It just sort of like the experience over time sort of evolved into this thing that I'm doing. And so I've learned a lot about uh, what it means to run a small business. It's been a lot of trial and error. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've said yes to some collaborations that didn't feel really good. So I'm learning all of this over time. And I kind of feel like, especially in the last year, um, I've learned a lot about like, oh, how do I refine my website? How do I get a newsletter together? All of these things that when I put out my first pattern, which was the Cedar Hill cowl that I did with Madeline Tasha and Shibui, um, you know, I wasn't thinking about all of those things. It was just like, I'm just putting out this one pattern. And then I rushed a website together because I wasn't thinking about having a pattern shop, a place where people could buy all of these patterns because I only had one to sell. And so now as it's evolved over time and I've got a larger portfolio, I have to think about my work. If I want to do this full time, I've really got to think about my work, my design work as a small business. Um, uh, and it's been great. I mean, I recently joined this group called the Fiber Business Collective, which we were at H&H together. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about that in a little bit, but a lot of folks from that group were there. And it's been a great way for me to really analyze what I'm doing with my business, what I can do to plan for the next step, how to develop relationships with publications and yarn producers, other knitters, to always keep something going, and then always making sure that I've got some independent work going too. My kind of where things have now evolved into, from just having this one pattern that I just decided to experiment with to now doing this full time, is this challenge of trying to fill up the calendar and make sure that there's always good, fulfilling work that's happening, and also a variety of things. It's kind of fun to think about, like, and this is developed over time, is being able to think through like, oh, well, I've got this one independent project, but I've got this collaboration with a really small yarn producer, where we've got this really great connection and we're really both into this project together. Oh, and then there's this publication that's coming out, and it's a bigger company, so it's a little bit more hands off, and I kind of just handed my thing over and they were just going to take it and run with it. So I'm learning that kind of keeping that variety in my queue is what's kind of keeping things exciting, but also keeping the business moving forward.
I mean, it sounds like there is a lot of balls in the air. Like, is it stressful? Do you get burnout? Do you get under like pressure of constantly having to come up with another design and another design?
Yes. Yeah, the short answer is yes. Burnout is absolutely a thing, especially, as an independent worker and you want to say yes to everything and you want to keep that calendar full. I can look back to like just a couple of months ago, I had uh, a couple of projects that were lined up. And then, there were also a couple of deadlines. I had a couple of independent projects lined up and then a couple of deadlines that were coming up. And I can't move those deadlines that other people have set for me. Like there's a reason why they're set. And then it was just sort of like I'd wake up, I'd start knitting or I'd start designing. I mean, it was very intense work for about a month. And I got to the end of it and I was like, I'm taking a couple days off. Like you have to manage your time and understand that self-care is important in this space too. It's funny when you think like a lot of people ask me, they'll say, "Oh, that must be so nice that you get to knit all the time. It must be so relaxing." And I'm like, it's not relaxing when there's a deadline. Like, it's sometimes really stressful. So yeah, you have to take time for yourself and manage your time. So it can be stressful. The second part of that question about like coming up with designs, yeah, sometimes it can be really there's a lot of pressure when you're like, oh, I've got the submission coming up and I need to come up with something new and different. What's great is that there's inspiration everywhere, and if there's often a mood board or something that goes along with something that can help jog some ideas. And if I have any just random ideas that come up, I'll do a quick sketch. And, often I'm looking, you can't see this, but it's in front of me on my wall. I've got a bunch of Post-it notes, and a bunch of them are like little sketches of just like some little tiny motif that popped into my head that by itself doesn't make a lot of sense. But one of these days it will find its way into a larger piece. Yeah, always thinking, always trying to come up with ideas. And um, yeah, yeah. Yes, you're right. A lot of balls in the air frequently.
Well, when you talk about knitting being relaxing, like people see it as a hobby and they're like, you came home and you just watch TV and you knit a sock, right? When you design, that's not the case. Like you have to concentrate, you have to take notes, you have to count, you have to figure out how it's gonna all work together. Have it ever taken like a joy out of knitting for you?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, there have been some projects where I've definitely been like, I can't wait for this to be done. And it's less about, I'm less concerned about the knitter's experience on the other side, because um it's not like, oh, this I'm bored with this project. It's this has taken up so much mental space, like I need to move on to the next thing. So happens. It happens sometimes. I'm working on a piece right now that I'm almost done with, and I literally thought I was going to get through the last repeat of the chart yesterday. Didn't quite make it, and I was like, we watched, I do it while I watch TV often. What's great about knitting is it's portable. I can take my work anywhere I go. And we're just watching TV, and it was like I was starting to get tired, and I was like, no, we're done. I'm like 10 rows away from finishing this, and I just can't finish it tonight. But yes, occasionally it will happen where I don't enjoy working on a project. But that's usually because of external things. That's usually because I messed up. Or maybe it's usually because there's like a deadline that's like looming and I'm stressed about finishing it. Or maybe I realize, and this is like a thing that happens to us all the time, right? Like you realize that you messed up like 40 rows back, and you've got to go back and fix it. Like if this is going to be my sample that's going to be in the photos, and I can't hide this mistake, I've got to go back and fix it. Those moments can be really stressful, and those can suck the joy out of it. And especially if you're doing a lot of cable knitting, that can be really complicated to have to rip back and start over again, and just to think about all the time that you've lost. Um, so yeah, occasionally I don't enjoy it, but I will say for the most part, it's absolutely wonderful. It's like amazing that that I get to do this for work, that I get to knit and create things. So yeah, for the most part, it's something that does completely bring me joy.
Well, I told you before we started that I just came from Netherlands, and for the 8 days that I was there, I haven't touched my needles, and I can probably count the number of days in my whole knitting life of like how many days I actually didn't knit, like including those 7, right? Um, does your husband complain that you're always knitting?
No, 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 no. No, no, he's very supportive. In fact, he benefits a lot. Sometimes I'll make something. He's stolen quite a few pieces from me that were intended for myself, and he's got a nice collection of scarves and hats that he's just acquired from me. Some things I've made for him on my own. Here's an interesting. So he just had a birthday. And for the first time ever, we've been together, gee, like 13 years now almost, and I've never made him a sweater. And so his birthday gift is a sweater. So we've started to dig through Ravelry to come up with a pattern that he'd be interested in. So he's going to get a sweater this year. It'll probably be a few months before I get it finished, but he wants something that's cable knit. He like wants that classic cable knit, like a creamy Aran white kind of color. So I'm like, all right, my work is cut out for me. No, he doesn't complain at all. He's very happy to support it. He's been my greatest supporter on this career. And he's always willing to be driving the car so that I can work on something in the passenger seat while we're on a road trip somewhere and things like that. So no, doesn't complain at all.
Okay. Well, let's talk about H&H. We just recently got to finally meet in person and
Huh?
sit, chat, and knit together there. So for me, the best thing about H&H this year was not necessarily the show and not necessarily even all the people that I've met, but the amount of information that was shared. They had a day on Tuesday for content creators where there was like a whole bunch of lectures and classes and presentations and speed dating with brand representatives and all this jazz. And then even Wednesday and Thursday and Friday, there were like classes for all the professionals. And what I liked about the classes at H&H, there was like such a variety about how to run your business, how to use Shopify, how to find the influencers to work with for your brand, all kinds of different classes, right? What brought you to H&H and what did you gain from coming there?
Wow. Yeah. So I kind of made a close to last minute decision to go. Like I didn't plan to go until about 3 weeks before, and of course, I'd been aware of the show for the last couple of years, and I've just kind of been following them on Instagram, and I remember all of the posts from last year, and there's a little bit of like FOMO that came from that, but. I wasn't sure actually this year if like I felt like my business or my career was really in the place to go to a trade show like this. I've never been to a trade show before, and really, yeah. I mean, it was kind of this moment of realizing, oh wait, this is an opportunity for me to get out there and meet yarn producers. See yarns that I don't get to see at my local yarn shop, and start to develop relationships with other folks that are in the space, with the idea of expanding my design business, the idea of possibly getting yarn support from other yarn companies, from new yarn companies that I don't have relationships with, hoping that this can help expand my design calendar over the next year or year and a half. So that was my primary reason for wanting to go wanting to go to H&H, was to, really kind of like meet other people in the industry. Um, it was also like a, a wonderful opportunity to like meet people in person that, like you, who I've had this like internet relationship with, or, I've been on a previous podcast episode at the end of the Pride episode from a couple of years ago. So we've chatted over online. We've had this internet relationship, but it was really kind of incredible how many people I knew that were going, that I ran into, that I met in person for the first time after having this like Instagram relationship with. And then how many people I didn't know were going to be there that I just was like, oh, I'm kind of like, having a fan moment here. Like, this is pretty incredible. Um, so that was wonderful. It was wonderful to just walk the floor and talk to people, and just sort of like get to know all sorts of sides of the business. That was it was something I think I expected to experience, but I didn't expect to experience on the level that I did.
Right. So you think you're coming next year?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I got a lot out of going this year. I think one of the things that, once I figured out like, oh, I have a goal for this year, and I went, and I was very like laser focused on making sure that I met new people and got those relationships developed. But, you know, I learned a lot about the industry and about trends and kind of about like where things are now that will likely be different next year. And I think that was an extra benefit that I wasn't entirely sure what was going to look like. So I got a better sense of like where my design style fits into what people are interested in right now, or maybe like what kinds of yarns and colors that people are interested in doing, what kind of techniques and projects, like I went to a really great session that was focused on trends, and in that session, like even the emotional support chicken came up as like the thing that everyone's doing right now. So expect, in the next year, more emotional support animals that are coming out, and things like that. So it's really kind of fun to like, you can do as much research as you want to online. That's one way to get to know what the trends are like, but to get into a space with a bunch of other people who have different perspectives of the industry and are sharing those ideas, that's really unique. And I don't think I would have ever had that experience had I not shown up to H&H in person.
I mean, I think it's also like another benefit of coming there is because unlike the regular yarn festivals, let's say, it's really business to business. And the fact that there was like a bunch of countries represented, there were people from like all around the world. Like I met this Chinese lady who sells yak and silk and linen from China. And, there's a friend of mine from South Africa, Bridget from Cowgirl Blues. So there was like all these there were like people from Turkey, people from Germany, like basically like you get to see not only local American trends, but also you get to see what companies from other countries bring to the table.
Yeah, definitely. And you realize that at a place like this, this kind of event, that just how global the industry really is and how interconnected it is, and how it's I guess it's very different from the Fiber Festival. And whereas at the Fiber Festival, what you're experiencing is, like there's a vendor who's trying to sell you their yarn or whatever kind of, uh, you know, thing that they sell. But at a trade show like this, when it's all this business to business kind of interaction, they're not trying to sell the skeins that are on their display. They're trying to sell, boxes and boxes and boxes of yarn to the local yarn shop that came to the event, or whatever kind of distributor. So it's a very different vibe. It's a very different kind of intensity. And for me, it was really great because, although as a designer, I'm probably not their primary reason for going to H&H. So a vendor who's going, an exhibitor who's going, they're probably trying to get to the local yarn shop or the people who are going to buy their yarns wholesale to sell to other people. So designers are probably not their primary people that they're expecting to talk to, but um, because there's this like different level of intensity, there's this time to be able to sit and chat with people. And that was really valuable for me. That was really valuable for me.
And I think like it's even though like designers are probably not their target audience or influencers for this matter, like content creators, they not going to the show and setting up the booth to talk to the content creators, but there is all these collaborations happening because like there are lectures about how to work with designers and how to work with content creators and what benefits in it for the companies. So the companies are also open to these collaborations.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the sessions, like all those sessions that were part of the program, there were so many of them that were talking about things like social media and interviews with people who are designing things. I know that you did interviews. You were working all week. So there is definitely an understanding that a show like this, I went to a great session on the main stage that was about publishing. And, it's not really kind of on my plan for the next year. But honestly, I don't know anything about publishing a book of patterns, but it's part of our world. And there's definitely a lot of overlap there in my space. Now I've got a little bit more information, and now maybe I can think about maybe in a couple of years, maybe a book is a project that I might be interested in doing. So I came away from this whole, few days in Chicago with a ton of inspiration and a ton of new ideas and a lot more focus on, great, I can do this thing to help improve my business, or, I really need to improve this one section of my website that I've just been ignoring for a really long time. Um, uh, and, especially for someone like me where I work in this room, this is my office, my little studio, and I'm by myself except for my dog sometimes. You know so for me to get into a space where I get to share ideas with other people that are in the industry, that was really valuable for me. So yeah, you're right. Although maybe the exhibitors might have a different target audience, it's definitely the kind of trade show that's open to way more than just that kind of interaction, because there are so many different facets of our industry.
Well, the question that I have for you, so when we talked at the beginning, I mentioned that you dabble in a lot of different fiber arts, and H&H was like a playground there because there were fabrics and sewing machines and embroidery kits, and you name it, it was there. Anything craft related, fiber arts related, you could find there. Was that difficult for you to concentrate and keep in
Oh,
focus?
no, it was I mean, I was pretty laser focused on like what I was there for business, but my mother-in-law, she is an amazing quilter, and I was like, you've got to see what's here. Like I took a quick video of like the floor, and I was like, you would be over the moon just sort of like exploring all of this new stuff that everyone's exhibiting. No, I will say though, I would say like the one thing, now that I'm in a world where like I create my own clothes. I would really love to get into like sewing clothes for myself. I don't think I want to get into anything like I don't want to get into sewing patterns or anything like that, but like or even just learning how to like modify things by sewing. I've got this like really dinky sewing machine in my closet over here, that I don't use very much, and I did walk away being like, I think this is like in the near future is me kind of going back to that, because I would love to be able to like make my own shirts. Like, what? I mean, I know that that's like way more complicated than like the little tiny zippered bag that I made in a class once, um, but it's not that far-fetched to think that that's a possibility one day.
I was actually walking through the floor and I was like stopped in my tracks there because I saw this machine just doing this 3D embroidery all by itself. And I was like, what? They had to come and like take a closer look. There was like so many interesting things for things that I don't even know how to do. But it just like, it's amazing to see it all in one space. And this year, there was double the amount of vendors from in comparison to last year. In fact, Darren mentioned that even though HH Cologne is bigger space-wise, HH Americas had more vendors this
Oh,
year.
really? Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So it was like
Yeah,
amazing.
there was a lot. And from what I understand is that they expanded the fabric, the sewing and quilting part of it quite a bit this year. And that was, I mean, that's not really my space, but that was really fun to walk. I mean, you couldn't help but walk through all of that, and the quilts and that they had on display and the different kinds of fabrics that they had, really pretty incredible.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your day to day. So I also saw some pictures of you sipping wine or riding horses or snowshoeing. Tell me like how you manage all of it. How do you like do the business, need the things, and have time to like pursue your other passions?
Well, I'll start by saying that I don't go wine tasting, snowshoeing, and horseback riding every single day of my life. Those are things that are pretty occasional. I mean, what like my usual day? I mean, one of the great things about being in business for myself, is that I do have a little bit of flexibility with my day to day. There's definitely like my mornings are typically like the time when I'm doing I know that like my morning is I've got a sharper mind in the morning. So for me to do administrative stuff, do writing, design work if I'm doing like the layout of a pattern or something like that, that's going to be my morning time usually. I usually will also, before I actually get there, I usually will go for a short run. My husband usually takes care of our dog in the morning, which is great. I get to kind of have a slower start to my day, but morning is really kind of focused on the really kind of like the computer stuff. And then because I find that the afternoon, I'm kind of a little bit more tired in the afternoon. That's when I can do a lot. That's when I usually do a lot of my knitting. So after I have lunch, take the dog for another walk. This is when I can sit down and listen to some music or a podcast and really kind of work through, for a few hours because I do all of my samples. So it's a lot of knitting, and I really need to focus on that. So that's kind of what our day is like, and then by the end of my day is another walk with the dog and sort of get out in the neighborhood and yeah, it's very dog focused in our home. And then, a typical weeknight is usually pretty boring. It's usually then feed the dog, feed ourselves, probably watch some TV, and then call it a night. Um, but yes, there's all sorts of fun things that, active things that we like to do in this house. My husband and I actually met through a running club. So we've always been really active people. We love to go snowshoeing. Our dog Miles loves to go snowshoeing. We're kind of out of the season right now for us to be able to do that, but here in Portland, we've got some mountains that aren't that far away, so it's pretty easy for us to get to that when we want to. And also wine country's close by, so yes, we can go wine tasting pretty easily here. The horses is a hobby or a sport that I took up as a kid and then gave up, but started doing it shortly after we moved here to Portland. I haven't done it I haven't done it at all in the last couple of years, but it's something that I love to do and hope to find time to do it. It just really kind of came down to a time thing. The barn was a little too far away for me, but it's possible for me to get back to it sometime. But yeah, I mean, being in this, I think being in Portland really kind of changed. Moving from New York City, there were, it's a little bit more challenging to do certain activities. Like it's hard to ride a horse in New York City. I mean, so um, so moving here to Portland, I think really kind of opened us up to a whole new world of things, and that's something that we love, especially as people who love the outdoors. That's been a really good change for us.
Is there like some sort of fiber craft that you are dying to try but just didn't have time yet?
Oh, well, the one that I would say that I am very intrigued by, but I think I've accepted the fact that I won't do it, is spinning. Like, and I think what I love about spinning is the machine. Like, whatever, I'm really interested in the machine, and how it works, and I feel like I would be pretty good at it, um, because I'm very precise with my tension. So I feel like I would be pretty good at it, but um, I just I don't have time. I also don't have space for a spinning wheel. I mean, I know that you can also get like a small e-spinner, which I think they're really cool. Um,
Or drop spindle?
I could do. I mean, I guess that's more portable for sure. I did do a drop spindle once, and it was a mess. Like it was terrible. Um, I got a little kit at this like festival once. This is more than 10 years ago, probably 15 years ago. And there was like a, you know, wool and, and the drop spindle, and I said, "Is this enough for me to make a hat?" And the woman who sold it to me said, "Trust me, you will not be making a hat with the first yarn that you spin." And she was right. It was the worst. It was just slubby and messy and not anything I would knit with, but I love the idea of it. I just don't know that I will find the time anytime soon for it.
It's fine because like I feel exactly the same way. Like it's one of the things that like really fascinates me, and but then I'm afraid to jump into that rabbit hole because like then you have to buy all new supplies again, you know?
Yeah, but we're people who love that kind of thing. It's like you get into a new thing and you're like, "Oh, right, there's that accessory that I need to get." And we're like, I feel like fiber people are like they jump in like feet first. Like they are like, "I want it all." So maybe it does take a bit of restraint. Maybe that's it. Maybe I just have uh, a
Discipline.
good amount of willpower to say no.
Well, talking of fiber people, how did knitting community and fiber community change your life?
Yeah, wow. I mean, this is funny because I think a lot of the change has been kind of recent for me. And I think, you know, like I said before, in New York, didn't, I knew that there was a fiber community that existed, but I just never really quite found it. And I think, as I said before, like I found it when I moved to Portland. Um, it has given me a chance to really dive into creativity. And I think I've always wanted to be creative professionally. My academic background, I was my first degree is a BFA in theater from NYU. So my first career path was to be an actor. I wanted to be a creative person. I wanted to be in this more artistic space. And found shortly after graduating that performance wasn't really my thing. Uh, but coming back to this space is is really given me such an appreciation of the ability to do something completely creative. Um, I've I've also met a lot. I've made new friends that I wouldn't normally have interactions with, and it's wonderful to like share a craft with somebody who is like of a completely different world than you are. And getting involved with my local knitting guild, Puddletown Knitters Guild, has uh, been great for me. I'm on the board, so I've got responsibilities, and it's been a great way for me to become friends with people, be inspired by them. I mean, we all do different things. We all have different styles and different types of things that we're interested in, different things that we know. And so to be able to just share all of this stuff with other people and sort of get information from other people and appreciate what other people do, it's been wonderful. I mean, I think I feel like I've found a real community for, I can't believe I'm saying this, for the first time in my life, really. Like that I've really found a solid group of people that are super supportive, and I'm excited to see whenever I get to see them.
And
That's unique and that's different for me.
and it's like it sounds crazy, right? Like that you would find your real community and people who get you and people who support you among knitters. Like you wouldn't think that. You would think like you have to have something else in common, but sometimes that's enough. It's like a common language.
Yeah, and it's funny, like, to sit down with a bunch of knitters. Like before, like a great example is when we do our, when we have our monthly meetings for the knitting guild, we've got an hour of social knitting time before the program really starts. And you just sit and you're knitting with people, and whoever's at your table, you're like, all right, let's chat. It usually starts with, what are you working on?
Right.
And you kind of like talk about like, oh, that's a really neat project that you're working on. That's great. And the next thing you know, you're talking about their vacation, you're talking about their kids, you're talking about their dogs, whatever. And it's like a very easy entry into getting to know other people on a deeper level, and it's fun. It's fun to meet people this way. And I think because it's such a portable craft, it's very easy for us to like gather and work on what we're working on together. I imagine there are other crafts that make that a little bit more. I mean, it's probably pretty hard to like carry a loom around, right? But
So, Seth, what are you working on now?
oh, what am I working on? Okay, well, I mentioned before that the project that I haven't started working on is the sweater for my husband. So we'll be working on that. If anyone has any recommendations, I'm open to them. I don't think I have time to design something new for him, but I am working on a few things right now that I can't really share all details about, but I've got a couple of blankets coming out later this year, and I'm working on like this infinity cowl that's textured, that's a lot of fun. And I mentioned before there's a project that I'm working on that is it's an independent project, and it's uh, wallpaper inspired. And that's a big shawl, a big wrap rather, and a smaller scarf that will match. And then I'm just starting a couple of other things. I'm starting a shawl and a hat this week. So there's like kind of a lot that's going on in the air. It's kind of fun to be in one of it. It doesn't always work out this way where you've got a bunch of different designs that are in different phases of development. But when that lands, it's a lot of fun to just sort of like, all right, great, I got to finish this piece, finish this sample, and then write the pattern, then get it to my tech editor. And at the same time, I've got like sketches going for the next thing. So when I do get into this kind of rhythm, this is where I have a lot of fun.
Well, I can't wait to see what you're going to share with us in the nearest
Yeah,
future.
I'll share when I can.
And it's been a tremendous fun to have you on my channel again and see you in real life. It was even better. I'm going to share all the information of how people can find you and your
Great.
designs in the description of these videos, so you guys already know what to do. Go give Seth a follow, look at his patterns, put it in your favorites. That helps the algorithm, all that good stuff. Thank you
Great.
so much, Seth. Thank you.
Thank you, Rena. Thank you so much. It's good chatting with you again.
Thank you.